glad you've joined us again today for All Things Apostolic. We're going to have a great time. We're talking about, as I have mentioned earlier, that we're going to be talking about dispensations, eschatological subjects, ages, covenants, a lot of good things today. In fact, I would like to say that this, we believe, is going to be the most thorough treatment of these subjects for apostolic Pentecostals that we know of. It's going to take us some time. We're going to work our way through them. There'll be sections where you could study this part if you don't want to study this part, and go through the whole thing. But we're on our way. I'm glad to have with us two, I would say, co-hosts, but really they're hosts on All Things Apostolic, just like I am. We just happen to be together today. Pastor Myles Young and Pastor Jeremy Wilbanks. Pastor Myles Young from Sacramento, Elk Grove, California, and Pastor Wilbanks from Cullman, Alabama. Both of them are completing doctoral programs and are scholars in these subjects on a very high level. So we're excited about that, and welcome Pastor Young and Pastor Wilbanks. Maybe you want to greet everybody here.
Well, it's good to be here. Looking forward to the discussion.
Yes, sir. Thanks for having us back. We're excited about it.
Yeah. And from time to time, today there's three of us. Sometimes there's been one of us. Sometimes there's been two of us. There will be eventually times where there are five of us. And just because it's a wonderful study and it's a wonderful thing. I want to make clear here from the outset, we have absolutely no interest in some kind of rancid debating. We have no interest in divisiveness. We love everybody, and we're just doing this because, well, I hate to tell you this, we're just doing it because one thing, we like doing it. Okay, that's not a really very good reason, but the other reasons are we feel like it's important. We hope it stimulates discussion. We are going to talk about ages today. We're going to talk about dispensations. We're going to talk about covenants. I don't know how far we're going to get on that today. That's a lot of stuff.
Those are three
right
broad subjects.
Yeah, that's pretty broad. But we're going to get started on it. And I want to say this also, that we are going to be thorough. We're going to talk about the things that appear to be weaknesses in a discussion of dispensation. We're going to make a list of every single thing we can think of that's wrong with dispensationalism. In our minds, we have a very distinct line that we draw here on ATA between dispensationalism and a dispensational reading. Thank you, Pastor Wilbanks, for that little phrase. The difference between what we call dispensationalism and a dispensational reading of Scripture. And we think you're going to join us. In fact, we think everyone agrees with the dispensational reading of Scripture. Yeah. Now, if you're there pounding the desk and said, "Not me, not me," we think that you are. You just don't know it. So we're going to be your friend. We're going to be your friend and help you to see that you really do believe it. Well, whether you think that's funny or not, I think that's funny. So, so first of all, the whole scope of universal history, okay, that's about as broad as we can get, starting with the history of the earth in its place in the universe, starts with what we call ages. Ages, when you're talking theologically, is no different than ages when you're talking scientifically. They agree exactly. And there are three ages theologically. One of them is what is called the antediluvian age. It is the age before the earth was flooded, and which that, according to a covenant that God made with Noah, that would never happen again. So antediluvian, diluvian is a form of the word deluge, flood. and antediluvian. Anti doesn't mean against it there. It means before the antediluvian age. Okay. And then there is the present age. That's the age we live in right now. Um, and that age will change just like the antediluvian age changed. Each age changes with a major change in the Earth's surface. Okay, that's a way you can know there's a age change, and so the flood, the deluge changed the shape of life on Earth,
It's
and
a
was a
geological change.
yes, and then you've got the present age, which will end. The Apostle Peter talks about this, and others in the New Testament talk about it, and the book of Revelation talks about it, when there will be a radical change in the earth. Now, science agrees that it's coming. They say the earth, at least they have over the years, is going to be burned up. Now they may think it's going to be burned up completely, but the Bible tells us that it will burn. It'll be a renovation burn. It'll be a burn off that leads to a more positive earth. And then after that is what we call the age of ages. And that is the eternal state of earth and heaven. We don't know a whole lot about that. So I don't know. What do you guys got to add to that I'm leaving out here? Anything?
I like it. That's a good kickoff point.
Okay, yeah. And it's simple. It's not complicated. Within the antediluvian age and the present age, and maybe you could even say the age to come, there falls time periods that we identify as dispensations. Now, later on, just use the word now, whether you feel like you're going to cough it up when you say it or not. Just use the word now. We will explain this word later in pretty intensive depth. We will talk about that word and why it's a really important word and why it is a beautiful, beautiful word that reveals a lot of things in the Bible. For now, though, we're talking about it right this second as periods of time in which God deals with his people in a certain way, or periods of time that life on earth even is administrated from a divine standpoint in a certain way. But the first two of those dispensations fall in the antediluvian, that is before the flood age. Mm-hmm. And then if you're going to divide it into seven, the next five fall within the present age. And then the last one, whatever you're going to call it, may fall within the age of ages. That can be discussed later. So anyway.
Let me add there that why it's important, I think, to look at this from the standpoint of what we're going to get into as dispensation is, and I think Brother Wilbanks is going to talk about dispensations by definition, but as related to these epical shifts, I think is a term that is often used of these ages, is that there is something being done in this present age that affects what's going to be taking place in the age to come, even to the point that God is getting glory that will be revealed, the actions, how he's interacting with humanity, his sovereign will at work in this age. He's going to take that as almost show and tell in the age to come.
All right.
So there is a connection between the present and the age to come.
All right. So there's theological implications to these ages too,
Yes.
which I didn't mention, but you guys are discussing now. Okay. So maybe somebody could give us here maybe just a little rundown, a list of dispensations. Are we ready to get into that kind of stuff? We haven't done that.
Yeah, we can at least skip across the top of all seven of them, and that way we know kind of what we're talking about, just as an introductory measure. Classically, there are seven dispensations in a dispensational reading of Scripture, and I'll just read through them very quickly. The dispensation of innocence that covers the time from creation to the fall of humanity. The dispensation of conscience. It's the era of time that spans from the fall or the emergence from the fall to the flood of Noah. the dispensation of human government. This era begins as they come off of the ark, as the waters receded, and they are coming off of the ark in Genesis 8, and then in Genesis 9 is where that really kind of gets going. This era will last. The dispensation of human government will last through God's judgment at the Tower of Babel in Genesis chapter 11. The dispensation of promise, which is also called the patriarchal dispensation, begins with the call, the covenant of Abraham in Genesis chapter 12. And that will continue through the giving of the law, the Torah, to Moses in Exodus 19, 20, 21, all the way through 23. And then coming out of the dispensation of law, or after the dispensation of law, will be the dispensation of grace, which will, it's kind of the dispensation of law and the dispensation of grace will end and begin simultaneously, or maybe even we would say overlap. They would overlap with the ministry of John the Baptist. Scripture tells us that the law and the prophets were until John. The crucifixion, the life, ministry, and crucifixion of Jesus Christ, and then ultimately finding its apex at Pentecost, where the dispensation of grace actually moves inward. In fact, one of the descriptors of that era, it's called the church age, or the church era, the dispensation of the church. And then the final one will be the dispensation of the millennium at the very end, at the end of the dispensation of grace. So those would be the 7 classic dispensations. There's some discussion in different circles. Those are the ones that we hold to because we feel like those are the ones that emerge out of the narrative. Those are the different stewardships or administrations that come out of the meta narrative of Scripture.
Okay, so while we are not specifically doing a discussion at this point on covenants, I think we have to introduce it to the
Yes.
discussion. So you have these epical shifts, dispensations that kind of give you a broad brush scope of God of God's dealings with man from the Bible, and they're pretty clear, and we can talk about all that later. However, at the same time, there are 8 or 9, depending on how you count them, primary covenants that are made.
Yes.
Can you just talk a little bit? Let's just discuss a little bit about how those covenants track with dispensations, or how they relate to dispensations.
Okay, I think this is important to just understand how we read our Bible anyway, and this is something that you already talked about. All of those 7 dispensations that we just listed, and I think you even mentioned this, particularly with the first 2, they all of those fit inside those ages. Well, fitting inside the dispensations as major, irreplaceable features in the meta narrative that we've broken down into eras or dispensations or epical shifts. Fitting inside those dispensations as major, irreplaceable features are covenants. And let me just give you a very quick list, because we'll go back over these at a later date. But all of this is a part of developing an apostolic hermeneutic that doesn't downplay any major element of Scripture. So we'll list 8 today. The 8 covenants that we feel like fit as major features inside of these eras, these dispensations. The first one is the Edenic covenant. Second is the Adamic. Third is the Noahic. Fourth, the Abrahamic covenant. All of these fit in that Abrahamic covenant. I think it was Brother Young that mentioned earlier. These have eternal consequences and eternal ramifications. That Abrahamic covenant, God begins to deal with the whole world differently, and we'll touch on that in just a little bit. So, Abrahamic covenant, the Mosaic covenant, which is also called the Sinaitic covenant, the Palestinian covenant, which deals a lot with land covenants that are given to Israel, then the Davidic covenant, and the New Covenant. So those are the 8 covenants that we feel like fit well inside of those epical shifts, those administrations that we're calling dispensations in the meta narrative.
Yes, very good. You had any comment on that, Pastor Young?
No, I think it was well said, and specifically those I think it was the last four you mentioned there: Abrahamic land covenant, the Davidic covenant, and the new covenant. It's important that you understand those four are eternal
Yes.
and unconditional. Those were
Yes.
things that we see that came with eternal promise, that as you're looking through these ages, as you're looking through these dispensations, you're going to see the eternality of what was established. And I think it's important that Brother Wilbanks just made the connection of the covenants with the ages and the dispensation. You have to interpret Scripture with Scripture. All of this is tongue and groove stuff. You can't just isolate with private interpretation. You have to take a holistic look at this to understand how it all kind of interplays.
Yeah, I like it. Well, our time's up for today. We haven't got very far, but we're on the road. And tomorrow, maybe tomorrow, I don't know, this may be a minefield that we step into and it all blows up. But maybe tomorrow we can even talk about covenants on a little broader scale, because as people who have even a cursory knowledge of these particular subjects are aware that there is a thing called covenantal theology. And covenantal theology, oftentimes when you see it at first, it starts by explaining that there are these covenants in the Bible, which is what we just quickly and briefly reiterated. But that's not really what they mean. It's almost like just a little cover until we get down to what they mean by covenantal theology. So, and it's big. I mean, it's a thing that started basically out of the Calvinism and that era,
Reformed theology.
a little bit before, yeah, and many people adhere to that. They I mean, they don't. I don't think they even know everything it has to say about it. But maybe we can talk about it a little bit. Maybe that ought to be taken up at a later time. But we'll talk about it tomorrow. So if you want to see us get into a big mud hole tomorrow, come and join us. We'll see you then. Thank you for joining us today.